The chapter is called Value, not Values, as Jonathan pointed out, because I'm not really talking in this chapter about which particular everyday values we might consider to be the more important ones. I think there is a discussion to be had about values, but often values boils down to objectives. And that objective is often economic, as Jonathan pointed out. And I don't think values are objectives exactly. An objective is something that in the left hemisphere where you target, you find a line to go to it and achieve it. Whereas what I'm talking about is something that is, I believe, impossible to do without. I mean, it's not an invention. It is something that is there in the ground of our being. We don't, I think, a very important starting point is I don't believe that we invent values and paint them onto reality in order to cheer ourselves up, but that we actually discover values. They are there for the discovery. We either respond to them or we don't. And perhaps that would take us too far from this discussion, which hasn't even got going on value yet. But I do argue that the purpose of life, the reason the cosmos brings into being something quite so counterintuitive as life, with all its problems, is that it is the ability to bring forth in that cosmos something that can respond to these primordial values. So I think I start by saying something like, so consciousness is not what life brings, because I've suggested in a previous chapter that consciousness is everywhere in the universe, and that's becoming not an unusual point of view. It's, of course, very widely been accepted for thousands of years, particularly in the East, but it's now being accepted much more in the mainstream of analytic Anglo-American philosophy. But the idea of value is, I think there are a number of aspects to it, really. And perhaps if I just say something about what I take it that we generally believe and something about what I am going to argue or what I do argue there, that would help. There are about half a dozen of them. And one I've mentioned, which is this idea that we don't invent but discover it. And related to that is that it is not a cognitive derivation. It is not something that we look at life and then we attach certain sort of things and we call those values, but we have this ability to be in touch with something which is an ontological primitive. And we do it through what you've already mentioned, this concept of valueception, which I believe is a translation from the German of Max Scheler, who invented a word in German which didn't, until he made it up, exist, which is Wahrnehmung. No, sorry, Wahrnehmung is perception, but Wertnehmung, which is valuing. And so Wertnehmen is really a version of Wahrnehmung, which is a perfectly straightforward German word for perception. But the link with perception is interesting, because when we perceive things, we don't take in a piece of data passively. We're not like receptive plates that absorb data and then do a calculation on it and have a response. We immediately, as it were, get an idea of what it is that we're dealing with here. And in fact, we go to meet it, which is another interesting idea. So it's disclosed in a precognitive take on the gestalt of what we are seeing. It's not calculated. And this is particularly important when it comes to my understanding of morality itself, of goodness. It's now been for a long time normal within the mainstream of Western academia to consider that anyone who espouses another view of morality than utilitarianism must be making a fundamental mistake. But utilitarianism is exactly the kind of morality that is made simply out of making a calculation of what results from it. And that perhaps brings sharply into focus what I'm talking about. It's not about a result. It's not about a calculation towards a known goal. It is a something that evokes in us a reverberative relationship. So it calls to us, and it calls to us from in front. So it is in that sense rather like a final cause rather than efficient cause. Most of our thinking is to do with an efficient cause, which is what pushes us from behind, the thing that makes us do something in the way that one would make a machine do something. I know you know all this, Zach, but I'm just saying it for everyone's benefit. Whereas a final cause is a cause that brings you to do something because you have a relationship with it. It's not a self-generated concept, but it is another, and that's a very important part of what I'm saying. And there are just a couple of things more to say, and then I'll hand back to you. One is that this makes it something that is not determined, but is free. We can choose to respond or not, and we can choose what we believe actually fulfills each of these values. So I mentioned that there are goals or objectives or targets or things we like to do, and which ones we decide are beautiful, good, or true is another conversation, an important one. But I'm talking here about the very fact of there being beauty, goodness, and truth at all. And the last point I'd like to make is that utilitarian thinking, which is in fact the value of the left hemisphere, that of utility, means that values are designed to make us do something that is evolutionarily beneficial. So beauty is just a way of making us choose the right mate or whatever. Truth is, the idea of truth is just something that's made up by a powerful hierarchy to dragoon people into following it. And perhaps goodness is in the same league. Now, what I'm saying is that truly understood, properly understood, these values are fulfilled in being responded to in themselves, not for any further purpose beyond that.